Welcome to the Shifted podcast and video series. Each week we connect with teachers to hear their stories about teaching and learning during a global pandemic. We focus on shifting practices, digital tools and resources, health and wellness, maintaining balance, and supporting our students during these challenging times. The Shifted podcast is from the Greater Victoria School District in beautiful British Columbia, Canada, and is recorded on the unceded territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Shifted podcast. And this week we're talking to Allyson Hoffman, a counselor and psychology teacher from Esquimalt High School here in beautiful Victoria, BC, home to the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees and Esquimalt nation, upon whose land we live, we learn, we teach, and today we podcast. Allyson, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Really appreciate you being here.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
So I'm really curious about what life has been like for you as a secondary counselor in a role that relies so heavily on relationships and connections with students, and at a time when that in-person contact is so difficult to do safely and to do in our regular way. What's life been like for you over the last couple months?
Whoa, it's been a big, huge, massive learning curve. The systemic piece of the job has been the hardest. The core work of connecting with students doesn't really change because it's such a human interaction, but there are different stages, right? Like at the very beginning and just trying to figure out who were the people that we needed to connect with and how we were going to do that. And then as things kind of settled out and those systems came in, and then now we're here back at school. So there's really, kind of two different phases. That phase one where we were, limping into the summer, trying to connect and make sure everyone was safe. And that grads were meeting all their grad outcomes, and we were trying to support those students as they transitioned out of high school, and then getting the students back in here and trying to get them set up for learning and wellness here. So it's just been a massive learning curve, and it's required a lot of time and patience with everybody, including ourselves. So I think it's required, even though you're wanting to ramp up and get a hold of everyone, just lots of deep breaths and slowing down and what are we doing and how are we doing this well. So, and there's been some surprises along the way. So, yeah.
I'd love to get into a little bit more about what those surprises have looked like. But I'm curious, we first started recording some of these interviews back in June and July. And where the needs people had back then, I'm sure, are significantly different than they had now. And I know back in June, it was a matter of like, let's just get through to the end of the year. Let's try to get some semblance of normalcy wherever possible. And now we're into how do we continue to make progress in our new reality that we have? And I think back in June, we didn't know what the fall was going to look like yet. So a lot's changed. Based on the needs, the kids that are coming knocking at your door, have those needs changed? Have you noticed any shift in, concerns students are having or particular areas of difficulty for them?
Yeah, I think there's just an increased kind of a lot of unknowns. Like you said, we don't really know. I almost say to students every day, hey, it's my first pandemic too. We're all kind of working together. And so I think, I've been doing this for a long, long time, and normally I can answer those questions, no problem. And so it's harder to answer those questions with certainty. What's post-secondary going to look like? What are my classes going to look like? Where are my learning gaps going to be? How do I access resources if we're dealing with a mental health issue? They're all different. One thing I've noticed in terms of the concerns that are coming to my door is that the frequency isn't there. Like prior to the pandemic, people were coming down, and I don't know what counseling hallways are like at other schools, but it's usually a pretty chaotic space because school counselors and YFCs are so accessible, and they're great teams, and students are coming down and wanting to get help like right then and there. And sometimes we're able to accommodate that, and sometimes we're not. And now we can't really have the drop-ins coming in. So it's much more structured. So it's a little bit less open. So there's a little bit less of that kind of day-to-day maintenance. And then the students that you're seeing, I think, either many of them have left issues longer than they normally would have because we're harder to access, I think. And then, it's just a different kind of clientele and meeting space. So when the emergencies come, they're usually more severe than they would have been because they would have normally just come down. Oh, come see a counselor. In addition, I think a lot of teachers and EAs are having to do a little bit of that kind of mental health first aid in the classroom because that's where the students are. Yeah. And so we're kind of supporting those people from the sidelines as well. But yeah, lots of questions about post-secondary, lots of questions about struggling with the new system, the pacing of school. Especially at secondary, is so different, and it presents different learning challenges that we kind of help students navigate.
That was going to lead into my next question. Yeah, I'm curious about, here we are, we're recording this at the end of October, and we're a couple months into this quarterly system model, and that's a significant shift in the pacing for kids that are accustomed to smaller chunks of learning occurring in higher quantity throughout the day. So when you mention more kids having challenges with that, is there a particular theme or a particular type of challenge you're seeing, more frequently?
I just think it's a time management thing. And for some, depending on people's learning style, someone who needs to move a little more slowly, it's not that they don't have the time in the day, it's that their mind needs a little bit of time to pick up on concepts, especially with math and science and things like that. And it's just, they get something and they get confident and then they're on to the next thing. So it's just like there's no time to exhale and then it's over. And then my anticipation, and I'm sure the whole district's anticipation, is that, someone can have a course in quarter one and then all of a sudden they're not seeing that material again until September. Right. Yeah. So how do we do the maintenance of that over time? I think just how to manage time effectively is difficult. The other piece that's tough is the isolation, because even though students are together, they're in little silos around the school. And I know my own children, I've got a little glimpse into elementary, middle, and secondary because I have a son in elementary and a daughter in middle school. And that isolation piece, even though they're physically with other people, there is a connection issue. Like it's not the same school community that it was. I think it's much better than being at home. Yeah, for sure. I think students are happy to be back, but I think one of the goals of schools should be how do we increase a sense of community in the building, even though we're isolated? So aside from curriculum, how do we get those communities together? And then when people are well, I think they'll be better equipped to learn because they're feeling better and more positively about school. So
yeah, that sense of community is such a key part to, making sure everyone feels welcome and connected to their learning and connected to their sort of raison d'etre for being at school in the first place. And, I know you guys at Esquimalt have been doing a lot of initiatives, and I've kind of heard through Vicky and Tina about different leadership activities you've been doing outside on the field, and really interesting creative takes on team building or community building activities and exercises. Anything you think would be useful information to share with other counselors or other schools that you'd recommend as something you feel like, gosh, that really worked quite well for us this fall?
Yeah, I think Vicky, our Vice Principal, Vicky Roberts in particular, did an amazing job with transition with our grade 9s, and lots of other schools did. So just keep doing that piece of making the building familiar and fun. our grad leadership person's doing a great job with, instead of, because we're not having these big activities quite yet. You know, most schools don't have their, I don't think any schools are doing winter formals.
Yeah.
So our grad person is making sure there's a lot of micro activities, and more kids are participating in those. You know, more kids want to do those activities. They are really wanting to connect with other students, even in a distanced way. That isn't really through Zoom, no offense to Zoom or anything, but you know, they want to be in a room with other people. I think we all crave that as human beings. And yeah, so I think just some fun and joy in the building, those little snippets in the day that you can find, you know, laughing and being silly with kids. I mean, I'm going to dress up on Halloween this year, and
Yeah.
just for some sense of fun, you know. Yeah, and I think, I mean, our grad last year in particular is my best example of why that's important.
Mm.
You know, we did a community activity for grad, and it not only filled the buckets of all of the grads that got to participate in this amazing event, but for our teachers as well, and our staff and EA and admin, and everybody felt great on that day. So the more community you can do, I think it helps the learning piece as well. Because it just, I mean, for everybody globally, it's this collective sense of isolation.
Yeah.
And anticipatory loss of what are things going to look like.
Yeah. Yeah. And the
Yeah.
uncertainty, and any chance to grasp some little teeny semblance of normalcy is key, isn't it?
Anywhere you can find it is, yeah. Even if it's a small exchange with a student or a silly announcement you can make, or I don't know.
You got to check your ego at the door and just put on the goofy hat.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've always been kind of silly. Anyone who's worked with me knows. Anyone who's seen any of my lip sync performances.
Maybe we should link to your YouTube video.
Yeah, you know, we've got a little bit of a lip sync trio here.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned earlier, you know, some interesting things that have occurred, and the one kind of theme that's run through a lot of the conversations we've been having is about, you know, although we've been faced, you know, numerous challenges over the last few months, there actually has been some interesting little glimmers of silver linings and opportunities that have come about, and you know, things that we may very well continue to maintain post-pandemic. And I'm curious, what of these little glimmers have you experienced over the last few months that
I think, well, I wish the pandemic hadn't happened. I think that for some students, they've gained an appreciation of education, and the privilege that we have in our society and in Canada to have a great public education system that we kind of take for granted. So I think a lot of students don't realize how much they love school, and didn't realize how much they love school until it was taken away from them. So a lot of students are just happy to be here and connect. So that's one. I do like the idea of some of the quarter system things, because for secondary anyway, because you're with your class longer, and there's this opportunity to really connect, and it's not feeling so rushed, and you can kind of slow down your teaching in some ways. There are challenges with some curriculum with that. I'm loving the later start time. Just a little plug for late start time, because I actually think students are functioning better having even that half an hour, 40 minutes extra in the morning. That has been, most people know we have a bit of a sleep crisis going on with youth right now. And I think that flexible learning model is allowing for some more sleep. And that's huge.
Well, there's no shortage of research that validates that.
Yeah. Talk about it in my psychology class.
Mm.
And then I think just, yeah, that, you know, that those little opportunities as educators to think creatively about education. I mean, we sort of get stuck in our way of doing things, even as counselors, as teachers, as EAs, librarians, whoever you are. We've really had to think about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're doing it, and is this the best way? So I'm very, very interested to see how we transition back into whatever the normal is going to be, what things we keep, what things we say, woof, glad that's not happening anymore. I'm just so curious to see that. yeah, so I think it's an opportunity to think differently about education and about counseling as well. Was it good to have students constantly able to see us all the time? We know there's a big burnout rate with counselors. We know that in regular life, you don't have a counselor at your beck and call, like whenever you want to see them. Maybe it's forced us a little bit to step back and how are we doing our work? And is this the best thing for our students and for our practitioners, whether they're YFCs or counselors in the schools?
Yeah, those are some great perspectives. And sometimes being forced to change is the only way we can actually step outside of our fishbowl. And I think it's only human nature, right? As human beings, we gravitate towards the familiarity. And
Absolutely.
it certainly isn't any, criticism of anybody. That's just
No.
human nature. And
it's a sign of being busy, right? I'd love to have some time to sit back and reflect on my work. And, we don't often have that in a day. So, yeah.
That's great. If you had to give any advice to somebody entering the counseling profession at a school in this current climate, what would you say to them?
Oh, geez, that's a tough one. This work is amazing. It's challenging because we're in this collective sort of experience. I think more important than ever, setting your own boundary and taking care of yourself and practicing, compassion with yourself and being patient with yourself is really important because the work is hard. And we have our own personal challenges and that range for everybody in terms of how we're dealing with the pandemic. And I think all educators need to be patient with themselves for that. Collaboration, I would not be able to do this work. I love our team here because we don't work in isolation. If we're unsure about something, we ask questions. I've been doing this a long time. I still go to colleagues and say, do you think this is the right thing to do? Which resource do you think is the best to check in with? I would say if you have the opportunity, collaborate. There's lots of counselors in the district, though, that don't have that opportunity. Many elementary and middle school counselors, they really work on their own or maybe with one other person. And that's one thing that I think is challenging. And I think our district leadership is really trying to provide an outlet where they can talk with each other because this work is really hard to do if you're doing it on your own. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just slowing down and checking in with kids and not assuming that they're okay. I mean, whenever you ask anyone, whether they're a student or an adult in the building, how are you doing? Most people answer, I'm good, I'm fine. And so just slowing down and really trying to check in with people and see how they're doing and just be curious and open with how people are.
I love it. Be curious. That's we could put a big hashtag be curious at the bottom of the screen here. So I think that's great. Anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, I don't. Well, maybe I just thank you for being interested in what we're doing here at the school. I think and in our school communities because we're all working so in such isolated ways. So I think if we hear how it's going for other people at other schools, it's really helpful. And it might be different for people everywhere, but I think just everyone is doing their best. I just see how hard educators are working at all levels, anyone in the building. And I just feel grateful to work with wonderful, supportive people. And I think just find your people.
It's amazing how hard you have to work to slow down sometimes, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, Allyson.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you for watching or listening to the show. You can find all of our episodes, leave us a voice message, or send us any questions or comments at our website, shift-ed.ca. Until next time, take care.